nonprofit social enterprise consulting organization in the McIntire School of Commerce. And it's also hosted by the Social Entrepreneurship at UVA initiative. So before we get started and before we thank our panelists for being here today, I'd like to tell you a little bit about that initiative. So a bunch of students a few years ago decided to apply for a JEF grant, a Jefferson Trust grant from the University of Virginia to increase the curricular offerings of social entrepreneurship in our university community. And since then, the initiative has grown with student leadership working with faculty and administrators to increase the course offerings of social entrepreneurship at the university, and that has culminated into a very successful partnership with the Batten School, with 3 social entrepreneurship courses being offered, I think, last fall, and a few more this semester and fall, and the partnership continues for next semester. In addition to that, this committee works to host events like this on social entrepreneurship so that the awareness of social entrepreneurship is increased in our community here at UVA. So this group, it's inevitable in the college environment for people to graduate, people to move on. So it's recruiting again for people who are interested to lead the initiative. And in that light, I'd just like to say that there's an application that's open. And if you're interested in applying, please email Carolyn Harris. Her email is up on the board over there. And the application is due April 5th, so you have some time. But I definitely encourage you to apply if you are interested, because it will mean taking on a big responsibility and creating change in terms of bringing social entrepreneurship to our university. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the floor to Phoebe, our VP of Education at SEED, who's been kind of spearheading, let's say, in terms of planning with Ross Baird for this event. And she's going to introduce the panelists, and yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm going to start with some introduction of our panelists, and I hope you guys have to endure the accolades. Starting with Paul Hudnut. Paul, all the way to the right, teaches entrepreneurship and strategy classes at the CSU College of Business. He's a co-founder of EnviroFit International, which is a leading provider of improved cook stoves in South Asia and Africa. Since 2010, he's been the senior advisor for global programs for Bohemian Impact Investments, based in Fort Collins, Colorado. He currently serves as a board member of New Belgium Brewing Co. and was the founding board chairman for Envirogen, a vaccine company focused on disease targets in developing countries. Prior to joining CSU, Mr. Hudnut was an executive in the biopharmaceutical and information services industries. He earned his BA from Colorado College, his law degree from UVA, and completed the program for management development at the Harvard Business School. Next, we have Ross Baird. Ross developed the Village Capital concept in 2009 and has led the development of 18 programs in 6 countries worldwide, serving 275 high-growth, high-impact ventures. Before launching Village Capital, he worked with First Light Ventures, a seed fund focused on impact investments in the Indian School Finance Company, an infrastructure bank for schools in the slums of Hyderabad, India. He has an MPhil from the University of Oxford, where he was a Marshall Scholar, and a BA from UVA, where he was both a Truman and Jefferson Scholar. Taryn Goodman is the Director of Impact Investing at RSF Social Finance, a nonprofit financial institution offering investing, lending, and giving services that support social and spiritual renewal. At RSF, Ms. Goodman manages the $40 million donor-advised fund impact investing portfolios, as well as the program-related investing fund focused on food and agriculture. Ms. Goodman first became involved with impact investing as an MBA candidate at the Johnson School, where she helped launch BR Microcapital, the first MBA student-managed microfinance fund, providing business and financial support to Tompkins County, New York. And finally, we have Miguel Granier, is the founder and managing director of Invested Development, a Boston-based impact investment management firm. Before founding ID, Miguel was the founding investment manager for First Light Ventures and founder of MCAP Consulting. He began his career in social enterprise as a loan officer for Axiom New York, and has also worked for the insurance giant Fidelity National Financial New York and Delta Business Institute in Beijing, China. All right, let's give him a round of applause. Well, thank you again for being here tonight. I'm going to start off about 25 minutes. I will ask our panelists some questions, and then I'll turn to you all to think of some questions. And if not, we'll get back to some more questions we have here. Okay, first off, would you guys mind telling us, as many of us are not business school students, would you tell us what is impact investing?
So impact investing is intentionally putting money to work in an investment that returns both financial return as well as a social environmental return. So there's oftentimes you can put money to work and oh wow, great, it just happened to save some trees, but this is actually has the intention on the front end of doing something social or environmentally positive.
Yeah, I would say it's an identification of what you are for, what you care about, what your values are. I would say at and every there's a phrase, if you've met one impact investor, you've met one impact investor. So a lot of times the impact is defined by who's putting money to work. I would say the biggest problems that we face are the huge disparity between rich and poor in the world, and the resource constraints mainly in food, energy, renewable resources, etc. And so we look to proactively deploy capital into ventures that are addressing those two big problems and can also provide financial returns. There's people who say, we don't invest in alcohol, tobacco, firearms, Darfur, etc. That's more identifying what you're against. I'd say impact investing is stating your values and backing companies that are seeing those through.
Okay, and going off of that point, why is it important, do you think, to make the distinction between impact investing and regular investing? Why is that important?
Well, I think as with many things that if you begin to say, as Ross said, this is what I'm for, and I mean, the world of investments are so large, you've got to have some screens on how you're approaching what you're going to look at, because a lot of investing is you see a lot of things and you've got to somehow put on filters or funnels to what deal flow you want to look at. I think maybe to add to what Taryn and Ross said, impact investing right now is primarily early stage or venture type investing. There aren't Fidelity mutual funds of impact investing at this point. I think when you mentioned introducing Taryn, the size portfolio she manages, that's actually a pretty large portfolio in impact investing. It's a really small portfolio if you were looking at municipal bonds or some other investment class. So I think that, as Ross says, what it is right now is kind of an alternative asset class to look and see, are there ways that you can deploy money into this space and make reasonable returns on the money, but also have social and environmental returns, as Taryn said, and it's still a very emergent field.
I like to say that I think that all investing is about risk and reward, and when you're just doing traditional investing, the reward is always strictly defined as sort of financial, and so you're balancing the risk out. And with impact investing, I think a lot of times we have to put more into that reward side simply because we're taking greater risks. It's not that we're not going to get the same returns or get market returns or get good returns or bad returns. It's just that we're going to take more risk than the at least monetary reward might justify. But we do that because we weight that reward segment by adding that there's an individual reward, a personal reward, a mission reward. That aspect of it.
I also see it as kind of financial responsibility in a lot of ways. If I'm stewarding other people's money over a long-term time horizon, and I'm investing in limited natural resources or anything that's not sustainable in the long run, I think of that as poor risk management and poor money management. And so what may not necessarily kind of be like, I'm doing this for poverty alleviation, if I'm investing in something that is a long-term investment, it doesn't make sense over the long term. I often look at it as a lot of times just fiduciary responsibility when we talk about where the opportunities to maximize returns, or even maintain capital over the long run with changing environmental and economic conditions in, let's just say within the U.S. and or developed countries, where are the opportunities, and I see kind of where we're focusing on is where the opportunities lie for long-term investment that is potentially relatively safer during, unexpected and, disruptive times.
do you mind talking a little bit more about these portfolios? What sort of businesses do impact investors look into, and what are your key strategies?
I go back to Ross's statement that if you met one impact investor, you met one impact investor. I think the one thing about investing is that it's a nice word to categorize a method of transferring currency, but other than that, it's really pretty much individualistic. So our fund in particular focuses on mobile technology, alternative energy startups, really early seed stage companies, and we take a very venture capital approach of investing largely in equity, being heavily involved in the management of the companies, and looking for companies that have sort of extraordinary growth potential. That said, I mean, we're still impact investors, so we're still trying to measure that they're going after a market that we believe is underserved, or what we look for as particularly market failures. But that's our segment of it, and if you take Terrence, he's got a very different investment thesis, even though we're both considered impact investors.
Yeah, so my organization is primarily a debt provider. And how do we do that responsibly and efficiently? Well, we've said we can't really do international debt lending. It's often difficult, particularly when you're looking for collateralized senior debt. So we focus within the U.S. We focus on 3 areas: food and ag, education, the arts, and ecological stewardship. And based on the notes that we sell to investors, we have a certain risk profile that we have to maintain. So one of the, we have a certain cut of, basically of enterprises that are at a certain level in terms of maturity that we can lend to, based on break-even cash flows, things like that, as well as the fact that we need to collateralize them. We have people that can invest a minimum of $1,000. We have people that have their entire retirements with us. So when we look at it, we have, I love this guy just made a face, I don't know if it's for me, but yeah, I often made the same face when I hear people have their entire retirements with us. So we take a very different approach based on our product, but also based on where our expertise is. So, picking certain sectors where you can really lend yourself to understanding deep. We're very much believers that if we don't get what you do, we're not going to play in your sandbox. So, and I'm not the smartest person out there, so we can weed out a lot of organizations pretty quickly.
There's a lot about impact investing that's similar to just mainstream entrepreneurship. And I'd say the biggest thing is really good, and I'm coming from a stage where we invest in very early stage entrepreneurs, typically who will have a prototype or a concept. So for example, we just invested 2 weeks ago in 2 companies. One is called Clean NG, and they have a tank that can store clean natural gas. So if you've got a truck that is going cross country that runs on diesel, you might want to convert it to clean natural gas, which affects greenhouse gas emission reduction tremendously if every 18-wheeler in the country did it. The reason why these folks don't do it is they don't want to be able to drive cross country and worry about finding another clean natural gas filling station. These guys make cheap storage containers for natural gas. You can load up 3 in the back of your truck and go cross country and swap out one tank for another. It increases vehicle range. Very, very unsexy idea. We talked earlier today about like cook stoves for poor people in India, and this EnviroFit, a company that Paul co-founded. The cook stoves for poor people in India are way more likely to make the front page of Forbes than clean natural gas storage tanks. Even though we believe that both of the impacts are necessary, we're equally worried about poverty alleviation and renewable energy. So one of the things that we look for is really, really big problems that are important that this is a simple solution to. And the idea of 18-wheelers wanting to convert to clean natural gas but not having vehicle range is a big problem. It's an important problem. It's a problem that tens of thousands of trucks across the country could benefit from. And it's a company that solves it. And the benefit of the company solving it is really baked in with the impact. So it's not like the company, is doing this and buying carbon offsets over here and the impact isn't really connected. Like every one of these tanks they sell is tangible greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So we really look for people who are solving problems when you get right down to it.
The investments we've done, we've only been working on the impact investing for a couple of years, and I work on that as well as their global philanthropy, and we view those as integrated programs. So when an entrepreneur comes to us, and we can do everything from grants to early stage equity deals, but we're really looking at trying to figure out for that entrepreneur, for that business, how can capital help them either get proof of concept at a relatively low cost, or if they have proof of concept, if they've validated their business model, how they can scale that up. The investments we've done range from very early stage convertible debt deals to investing in impact investing funds. There aren't that many of those, but we feel that if we see a fund that's doing work that we like, that we want to support the space and see that grow. But again, there are right now a couple funds trying to get raised in the $100 million size. There are a few in the past few years that have been raised, but again, they're relative. This is still a pretty emergent field. That is a decent sized venture fund. Would be a very, very tiny PE fund. So that just in terms of kind of scale. So the early stage convertible debt deal we did is a company that's working on providing really inexpensive clean birth kits in rural India. In those markets, a number of children and mothers die every year because of post birth infections and hemorrhaging, and they're basically trying to figure out how to solve that. And it comes down to having a kit that costs about $1.25, and obviously, as undergrads, I understand that even at a good margin, you'd have to sell a lot of those, and so it's a challenging business. For us, if we can figure out a way that we can make even some return on that business, and we may not, this one may not happen for us, but if we see that, these rural births are happening in cleaner, more sterile conditions, and that's cutting down infection rates, that's very interesting to the people that are behind our money. We also, to Taryn's points, we buy notes in a group out of Boston called Root Capital. They work on providing debt to intermediaries, so think of coffee exporters, cocoa exporters, and basically our debt is secured by contracts with groups like Starbucks or Whole Foods or those things, so it's actually a fairly secure instrument. We take a fairly low return on it, a couple %, but in the current interest environment, that's not, that much below market. But the advantage is they work with the farmers on more sustainable agricultural practice, fair labor, fair trade standards, and so they're driving change and just better business practices, turning them into better entrepreneurs, teaching them about accounting and IT systems and some of those things, so that they're kind of at several different levels. There's positive change as a result of their involvement, and that's a nonprofit organization that basically borrows money from us at 2% and relends it down in Latin America for 9%. And as their portfolio scales, they're within spitting distance of becoming a self-sustaining nonprofit. So that's a pretty cool business as well. If you want to look into, we'll try to mention names of things you can look up afterwards, because I think there are a lot of kind of intriguing businesses in this space.
Yeah, if you want to go to Investor Development Portfolio or our website or RSF website, you can look at portfolios online and see a lot of the companies as well.
So yeah,
Bohemian as well, I'm sure.
I will say, just to be clear, we have two sides of the house. On one side, we do the debt lending. On the other side are my portfolios that I invest in other funds. So we have an investment group capital as well. So I kind of go both ways, if you will. So just to be clear, you can also see kind of some of the funds that we're in on our website as well.
Can I just break for a second? Just like see us throw thumbs, or like we communicating at a level that makes sense to you guys? Are we going too simple or way over that? So thumbs up on about right? Great. Okay. Sometimes just not sure of the audience.
Thank you. Let's talk about metrics. How do metrics differ for measuring return on investment than regular investing?
I mean, again, I would say that the kind of companies that we pick, we like.
One metric, you've met one metric.
You met one metric, yeah, you met one.
Yeah, I thought that was foundation, actually.
It's everybody.
Yeah,
it's everybody. Everybody's there in person. We're all people. Real wisdom from the panel.
Deep thoughts by Ross
Yeah,
Berg.
we're all people. So we really have put a lot of thought and probably a lot more discipline to this over the last year. And I'd say two things. One, on a company level, we've really tried to focus on companies where operational metrics and impact metrics are as close as possible. So one of our investments is an investment that we share with Miguel's fund called Simpa Networks, where it's essentially you have a solar energy system in your home. Families live off the electricity grid, want to buy these solar systems. They cost $200. If you make $3 a day, that's a lot of days to afford a $200 solar system. Simpa has a mobile meter that plugs into this solar system, so people can basically pay as they go, and so you'll pay a fraction of that $200 per day over the course of about 2 years, and you can essentially rent to own your solar system. And Simpa basically finances your ability to own that. Now, the amazing thing about the mobile meter is if you're talking to Simpa, you can measure how many systems they've financed. You can also measure how many fractions of systems they've financed, because that's something that Simpa's tracking anyway, because that's how they make money. So Simpa's revenue stream and the impact that we care about, which is, you know, actual energy delivered to people's homes, is very, very close together. Businesses that we are not as crazy about is how many of you know Tom's Shoes? Have you owned Tom's Shoes? You don't have to be embarrassed, it's okay. Why did you buy Tom's Shoes?
Because they're cute. Because I liked them. I don't know.
So most people buy Tom's Shoes because they like them. Like UVA sorority girls and Brooklyn hipsters, and they're great. They're great. Now if Tom's Shoes decided tomorrow to stop, Tom's Shoes' big thing is buy a pair of shoes and we'll give a pair of shoes away in emerging markets. And if Tom's Shoes tomorrow said we're gonna stop doing that, but we're gonna still sell our cute shoes, like, odds are you might buy another pair of Tom's. You wouldn't be that mad that thing. You might. I don't know you, but but the impact happens over here, and the revenue happens over here. And there are a lot of ventures where the impact case is harder to make, and we are really focused on a company basis where the operations and the impact are as baked in or as tied together as they can. And I think we've gotten a lot more focused on that. There are other ways that the industry measures impact that I might turn over, but that's where we are brass
Can I
tacks.
just say that my daughter also owns Tom's Shoes?
She does.
She does?
Yeah, she does. She doesn't wear them yet. They're too big.
I mean, that's interesting. So to kind of build on what Ross is saying, when we look at investments, one of our concerns is if you're making an impact investment, I mean, let's take some other brands, Ben & Jerry's, Tom's of Maine. These are companies that started out with very much mission-driven. They were going to, you know, and as they grew and they brought in additional finance, their mission drifted, right? So they may still be that we perceive Ben & Jerry's as having healthy cows or anything, but their social mission kind of left as Unilever left. Now, they've recently become a B corporation. I think they're still doing a lot for a really large brand. I think they're definitely a responsible company. But what we look at is, so the difference between, say, shoes, or next week Peter Eliason from Vision Spring is visiting. Well, Vision Spring has something similar set up with Warby Parker, the glasses company. So if you buy Warby Parker glasses, they make a donation to Vision Spring, and Vision Spring provides a pair of glasses. The difference to me is the impact baked into the product or service? Not really with ice cream. There, the mission of Ben & Jerry's, the social mission, came from their involvement in communities and philanthropy and those types of things.
And if you baked ice cream, it would melt.
Yes, true.
Wow.
But if you look at things like eyeglasses that will help the students see in class, or maybe there's a difference between eyeglasses or clean birth kits and shoes. Maybe not. Maybe the shoes are important to go to school. But I think, as Ross says, the more the company's products and services are what has the impact. You know, the clean cook stoves that Envirofit has, those types of things. That's better than a company that and I'm not saying companies that have a certain percent that go to philanthropy or whatever, that's better than not having any, and it drives certain values in their culture, but it's different than having products and services that themselves have an impact.
So I agree with both of them. When we evaluate we've actually moved away from what we're calling a socially responsible enterprise, which is I make an organic cookie or cracker, and one day I can decide that natural is cheaper than organic, so I'm going to change, to kind of this idea that the impact is baked in to, you know, but for this impact, the company would not exist, is kind of how we look at things. And we also look downstream of the supply chain as well as how you're influencing consumers, et cetera. When it comes to measurement, this is where I think it's interesting. There's a lot of pressure to measure impact, similar to what Miguel said, of if I'm going to have a longer time horizon before I see some liquidity, or I'm potentially going to take a, you know, a lower financial return, or even a market rate return, whatever it is, what is the impact that I'm creating? And I think it gets tricky in there because, you know, what can we measure? We've been doing, first of all, let's take a step back. We've been doing philanthropy for years, and adequately measuring outcomes from philanthropy still has yet to happen. And so all of a sudden we're saying, well, we're doing investments, we need to be able to measure that. But what we've been able to do is measure outputs. So the example that I always use are the mosquito nets. We want to prevent malaria. We want to prevent malaria. And so we're going to give out mosquito nets. So I gave out 100 mosquito nets. Everybody has 4 people in their family. I saved 400 people. So you have this output, and then I'm going to draw a dotted line to the outcome. Well, the truth, what happens when you give away free mosquito nets? What do people do with that? They go fishing. So they're great for fishing. We've seen it. So the connection between outputs and outcomes is very much a dotted line. And we're skeptical on, like, how do we, measuring outcomes is really expensive. And that's why, you know, we don't see it. And at the same time, if I'm going to force an organization to measure outcomes or even output, sometimes it's very intensive. And we're talking about these early stage organizations that are operating in geographies and sectors that underdeveloped, you know, have, you know, telling them to go measure stuff on top of just trying to create a business that's viable is very difficult. So I think sometimes you can do a disservice to a business by saying, you know, this is what we care about, go out and give me this data. And so I think, you know, as an organization, we've taken a kind of weird view because we're weird. That's just how we function. We've looked at organizations over a 3-year period now and basically done a survey every 3 years to see how us funding them and our relationship with them has changed their business. And so we're looking at the change over the year versus, like, what are your outputs, things like that. So I don't know if that's any better or any worse. That's just kind of how we do it.
Yeah, I think your question raises what is really a key issue for impact investing. Is if we stand up here and say impact investing isn't just about return, it's about impact, you're smart and clients are smart to say, so how are you going to show me impact? I can calculate, or I can hire someone from McIntyre to calculate ROIs and IRRs and all that, but how does that work for birth kits? We can still calculate the return on investment on that investment in that company, but what's the social impact of clean births? And the fact that, you know, we sell 10,000 kits a month doesn't necessarily, I mean, figuring out which life you saved is almost impossible. You can't do it. So you have to make these kind of decisions to use, as Taryn was saying, a dotted line to say, okay, if you, you know, in cook stoves, more people die every year from indoor air pollution than they did in the tsunami in Indonesia a few years ago. We don't know how to prevent tsunamis. We know how to prevent indoor air pollution. If we put in enough clean cook stoves, we think there'll be fewer deaths from indoor air pollution, but it's going to be very hard to point to which ones. And, you know, when we look at developed world issues like getting people to quit smoking, and, you know, if you quit smoking, you can still die from lung cancer years later. Indoor air pollution may be the same way. So there are all these complicating factors, and yet everybody wants to try to drive to, like, really simple things. And so, you know, there have been groups that have, there's IRIS, which is a group of impact investing standards, and it's a good try, but it doesn't allow you, I mean, the wonderful thing about ROI and IRR is you can compare 2 different companies in very different industries and say, this has a higher rate of return than this one does. It's much harder to say that investing in mosquito nets versus vaccines versus inexpensive drugs, which of those is going to have the most impact. And I think it's going to be that way for a while. maybe forever.
Can you tell us a little bit more about IRIS? And is it a regulatory board?
No, it's a group of impact investors called the GIIN, G-I-I-N, Global Impact Investing Network, and it's the
It's impact reporting and investment standards.
Yeah.
So basically the idea is we need to create standards across the board for certain sectors in terms of impact. And so they focus on different sectors like education, and they bring a group together and decide what the things we should measure in education are. And basically what they've then said is, okay, all these different funds come together who are focused on education, give us your data. And so then they can create an impact benchmark, but they're measuring outputs at this point. And so what is the impact benchmark? So I can say, well, I can invest in Miguel or Ross's fund. What are their impact, what are their IRIS ratings? And then, well, they're going to both provide me a 6% IRR or whatever it is, but Ross's impact ratings are higher than Miguel's, so, or are higher than the benchmark, and Miguel's are lower. So it's trying to give you a benchmark. There's just a lot of issues. There's huge adoption issues. There are, kind of, again, measuring outputs. There's issues around, a lot of people have proprietary systems like we do. So, it's only as good as the data it gets. At the same time, so like they did education, and they did food and agriculture, and when I looked at it, it was like number of acres farmed. Well, that's really great. Well, I don't even think it's that great, but if you're looking at Africa, but like in the US, Monsanto wins, ADM wins every single time. So it's not a matter of how big your farm is, it's a matter about soil quality, it's a matter of, quality of the crops that you're producing, things like that, biodiversity. So it's a bit more complex, so that's the other issue. We're operating in all these different geographies that have their own unique issues. It's difficult to have like this one broad.
Yeah.
And I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you want to say something about the last question, or Miguel?
No. I think it covers.
Sorry. So then I'm going to move on to more how you all can get involved in impact investing. But before we make that change, do you guys have any questions for the panelists? Yes.
So you mentioned about aligning sort of the operations of a firm with the sources of income. And I understand how that works with you looking at sort of companies that are greenwashing or sort of have sort of divergent models. But how do you think about something that's like sort of straight infrastructure investment, or the sort of more plain vanilla, we're building core infrastructure in emerging markets that's going to have some sort of macro bottom line impact for people, like building roads or building storage for food or that sort of stuff. Is that within your scope, or is that outside of the scope of impact investing? Because it seems to have social benefit, but it's a more sort of a conventional play.
No, I'd say that's very much within our scope. I mean, I'd say that affordable basic services that the poor can use, or infrastructure that the poor can leverage, makes a lot of sense. I mean, when you say greenwashing, I think that's something that we're actually less interested in, like impact as marketing or impact as brand versus impact as what this business needs to do a really good job at in order to continue to thrive as a business. So I don't know if you want to talk about Promethean or these other infrastructure plays.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. One of our companies has a chilling technology for milk for dairy producers in India, and it's also a big problem that a lot of dairy production happens off of grid, and so you collect the milk in these off-grid sites. It takes a long time to get it to somewhere where you can actually have the energy to chill it, which means that a lot of milk spoils, which means milk value is down because the quality is down. But it's a very sort of almost tertiary benefit to the farmer, which is who you really kind of want to say from an impact standpoint. We're helping these dairy farmers. But at the same time, the first thing we're helping is these dairy cooperatives, which are pretty large, well-funded organizations. And you wouldn't really say that, oh, that's our impact. But that impact does, over time, trickle down to those farmers. And what we view it as, this is an infrastructure hurdle that's not being solved by the local community or by the local government, simply because they're so back and behind on this. And so our intervention in providing this initial funding through this company, getting them through that R&D stage and as they scale up, is actually skipping that, is we're going past where they would. So if we were not there, this would not happen. And we think the overall benefit is very, very valuable. So that's kind of an example of infrastructure.
I would jump into, which is, I think when you ask about big infrastructure projects, probably none of the group up here that's not really our investment bailiwick. But I would say that your point that things like putting in roads and electricity and those types of things are some of the best things you can do for development. A lot of places where our portfolio companies are working, that doesn't happen. So those may be kind of certainly you see it in parts of India, but it's not ubiquitous through India that's happening. I also would say impact investors tend to differentiate from what would be called SME or small and medium-sized enterprise investing. So for us, we agree that investing in small and medium-sized enterprises, for instance, the Middle East or Sub-Saharan Africa, can be a great tool for economic development. That's not what we invest in. Again, the impact example I was using is like if someone wants to come up with a way to sell really good mattresses to the middle class in Ghana, that may be a great business. It may help drive employment in Ghana, may be a very forward-thinking company. We're not going to invest in that because we don't see that baked-in impact in bets. It's not that it's not a good company, it's just not within our investment screen.
I mean, that's a similar reason. One of the reasons about Tom's Shoes is Tom's like, oh great, we're giving away a free pair of shoes. Well, when you go to these developing worlds where they're giving away the free pair of shoes, and you talk to people and you say, what are your needs right now? I can go out on a limb and say over 90% of them aren't going to say, I just really wish I had a pair of shoes.
Well, the other thing is you may be putting out a business.
Well, that's I said this is one of the many, yeah.
Shoes isn't usually a good example, but
yeah,
a lot of times the giveaway programs can kind of undercut the markets, the local markets, and so you're undoing the good that you think you're doing.
Exactly.
Can I just add that invested development actually started as an infrastructure fund, and that crashed and burned pretty quickly. It's a really venture capital. So, there's a lot of problems with funding infrastructure. It's very difficult.
Go ahead.
You talked about the standards you use to evaluate potential investments, but I was wondering about the process you use to identify investments. How do you find the companies? How do you identify the companies you want?
Dartboard?
Call Ross.
In general.
Well, in any situation, it's all about kind of both companies find you and then you go out seeking them. I think we have this fear of what we're not finding could be better than what we are finding, so there's a balance in that sense. And I think what's difficult also when we're based here in the U.S. and we're operating potentially overseas, how do you know kind of locally who are the entrepreneurs that you should be working with? And that's why we call Ross.
Yeah, we got an army of folks not that different from you, and you could be one of them one day, who are in Nairobi, Brazil, Louisville, Kentucky, New Orleans, Ahmedabad, India, China, anywhere in between, talking to everyone who might be an entrepreneur. I mean, we have this idea of saying the best social entrepreneurs are the ones often who have never heard of social enterprise. They are just great entrepreneurs who have identified a problem. Maybe a lot of people in poverty are solving it and come up with something to fix it. So we've gotten great leads from being friendly with bank loan officers in Nairobi and saying, who do you like that came to you for a loan that it broke your heart you couldn't lend to, but you might be able to lend to in a couple of years. We go to like agriculture industry association conferences and find that one huckster who's trying to grab everyone in the hallway and sell them their hustle. Our entrepreneurs are really good at referring other entrepreneurs. Journalists are awesome, actually. If you go somewhere and talk to a journalist and say, what have you seen? Like, they've always got these entrepreneurs calling them up trying to get in the paper for something. So really, it's a volume game. Number of conversations with people who might be an entrepreneur, we think is directly correlated to the quality of people you have coming in.
Yeah, last year we looked at 350 plus investments. We made one. So, yeah, it was a bad year.
Yeah. For every one investment, we probably turned down 100.
Yeah, I do, as I said earlier, both philanthropy and investing. And someone said, describe your job. And I said, all day long I get to say no to really bright people working on incredibly interesting stuff. And like Miguel, we'll do a couple investments a year and we'll look at a lot more than that. And it's not a good part of the job. You just can't say yes to everybody.
really fine line.
So you might think we're nice people, but we're all people who just say no all the time.
I say apply to our program,
Yeah.
so your peers can say no to you. And then say,
I'll pass something on though. A mentor of mine said, you're going to have a hard time in this business because you keep leaving the doors open and then people hear things that you don't mean. And she said, always say no until you say yes. And I came into this business as an entrepreneur, and I have to tell you, I never really heard no, because the way you're wired as an entrepreneur is you don't hear no. But it's interesting now being on the funder side and being told that funders just say no, 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 and you just kind of have to keep persisting. So,
But I also think, you know, as an investor, sometimes we do a disservice by not saying no. Like as an entrepreneur, you know, you want to get in and we don't want to waste people's time. And so it's funny, you know, through some of the mentoring that I do, people come to me and say, well, this person asked for this, you know, they've been dragging me along, what does this mean? And you know, I blatantly have to be like, either, you know, call them and tell them to shit or get off the pot type of thing, or, you know, just leave it, because I mean, there's sometimes that it's promising, but I think it's responsible as an investor to say, you're not a fit, and this is why. I mean, you've often said, you know, come back to me when you've done X, Y, Z, and then maybe I'd be interested. So clear on where they need to go to get your interest, or clear on why there's just no hope.
All right, there are a few more questions. Yes.
Okay, my question is about there you said before when you said about like investing, and you said that it would be the right decision to invest in something sustainable in the long term that would yield like good returns. So when we talk about impact investing and your funds, how do you see it like on the market and like in terms of like people who would be investing in the fund, and then you know why is it growing very rapidly if it's a sustainable model, and why like let's say is there potential to enter the market with let's say like ETFs of like your fund or like something like that? How do you see it? How do you see like the difference between investing into something on the financial market as a market investing fund and it's investing in Bitcoin?
So I think a lot of times, so this is where I'm going to go off on you guys and get weird myself. I think a lot of times when everybody's concerned about, will I get a market rate return? And if I were to go around this room and say, what's a market rate return? I think we'd get a different answer from each person. And so that, I mean, that's my first thing to you is what is a market rate return? And, you know, basically it's commensurate with the risks that you're taking. And so when you were talking about kind of public equities and things like that, so when I look at the public equity market, you know, we're investing over long term. So, and technically if you're investing in an ETF, you're investing in the idea that all boats will continue to rise. That's basically what you're saying. You're saying, why should I do stock picking? Because I can invest in an ETF and I can get the best, you know, of it versus paying for an individual to pick my stocks on its own. So basically you're investing in all boats will rise. So you're investing in the fact that GDP is going to potentially continue to increase, right? That's what you're saying. All boats will continue to rise, GDP will continue to increase. So, I mean, this is, I'm going to go off on a tangent. You ready for it? So, what is GDP? How does GDP work? GDP works because we take natural resources, we make stuff, and then we throw it out, and then we buy it again. My microwave blew up. I was home, my mom threw me a stupid party, and I was home. My microwave blew up, and my friend's fiance was there with me, and he's from Australia. Australia, developed country. He was like, I love America. America, you can grow up, blow up, and you drive 10 minutes, you buy a new microwave. That's what we're talking about. So we're saying you're buying into the fact that we can continue to operate on this with no limitations, because that's why you're investing in the ETF, right? So you with me so far? So now what I'm saying is that's a bunch of BS. We can't continue to operate that. Even when we talk about bringing people out of poverty, we're not talking about bringing them to our level. Something's got to give. We have limited natural resources. Our ocean's acidity level is rising at a rate that's unbelievable. It's almost promised that our oceans will collapse in 2050. You know, the way things are functioning right now can't continue. We're seeing disruptions. We're seeing climate change events. We're seeing weather events that are disrupting business. So if you're not taking into account these things as a business, you're actually not going to be sustainable in the long term. So when I look at you and say, the fact is that you're operating in a way that's basically ignoring, as a public, a public company, all these different things, that's not good. The same thing if I look at, like, I think quarterly reporting is great. I think it gives us transparency into organizations. I think it's great. Do I want you to manage to quarterly earnings? Hell no. Because if you're managing to quarterly earnings, you're not managing over the long term. You're managing the, false promises type of thing. And so, like, I think there's give and takes in our financial system that we really need to think about as investors of, things are there because there's certain reasons why they're there to protect us or whatever it may be. But how, ETFs are great. They're, cost savings, things like that. We can put money to work. But as investors, how do we ensure that the companies themselves are actually doing things in a manner that's really for the long term, because that's how we're going in. So that's the short answer. I can go off more. Yeah, I mean, risk in modern portfolio theory is all about what you can measure. It's all about a number. If you can't measure it, you ignore it. So we can't measure climate change, we can't measure natural resource risk, we can't measure any of that. So we just ignore that all that's happening.
I mean, the Robert Kennedy line years ago about the problems with what the GDP doesn't measure, but generally a car crash is good news for the GDP. And at a macro level, I think what Taryn would say is we're kind of doing that at a macro level. It looks good for the GDP, but it isn't actually good for our society, for some communities within our society, those types of things. And so I think part of what we look at impact investing is, you have people get up at conferences and talk about how there are absolutely no trade-offs. You can go do this wonderful, do good, be good, make money. I don't think it's that clean, because I think the current system has built up over a long time. I don't think that it was done for any wrong reasons or whatever, but it was based on assumptions that, as Taryn says, may not be true anymore. And what I think people like you and people like us need to at least think about is, how do we want to invest our money, our time, our careers in trying to shore up a system that may be broken, or to kind of hack that system and figure out ways to make it better, and at the same time, build interesting companies, invest in interesting companies, that type of thing. And so, as I said when we started out, this is still very small funds, early stage capital. It's not big money. We're not talking about shorting Apple or going long Apple. We're talking about investing mostly in private companies and putting together portfolios.
I think actually one thing is, you guys are growing up after the housing boom kind of coming and learning about the economy. You look at the job market sort of after the bust of the housing boom, and it's a really interesting place to be in, because what the housing boom and bust taught us is that you one have to look at the underlying assets of whatever it is that you're investing in. You can't ignore that. And that past performance has nothing to do with future performance. And those are two things that were absolutely ignored in the housing market. And that led to I mean, really a massive economic downturn and a near depression for our economy. And that was something that, in the end of the day, the impact investment methodology that we look at calls into question a lot of the things that we were ignoring then. So from a general standpoint of looking at the underlying asset, looking at the long-term value of that underlying asset, and looking at the general good that's created, where the money is exchanging hands, is a lot of the thesis around impact investing. And that's exactly what didn't happen in what became a game of hot potato of unknown assets in the housing market. And so I think what Taryn's saying is we're doing something on a long term, very much we're doing the same thing with environmental environmental neglect, and so it's going to be in the end the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
I was going to, I don't have anything to add. Just to hear.
Yes.
Second.
All right, well, I don't want to keep you all too much longer. I know you have a dinner reservation, so let's take...
Hey, you're all invited
you're
to.
All invited.
We're going to go get snacks and drinks at Michael's Bistro. It's a Dutch treat, so you're not drinks on us, but we get to continue the conversation over beer, which is fun for everybody. So
let's take one or two more questions. I know I saw some more hands before. Yes.
To what extent do you guys step in and help manage the companies that you invest in?
I'll go first, because this is our hidden secret. We get asked all the time on the debt side of do you do consulting? And I will say that technical assistance is definitely necessary for a lot of organizations, and the secret answer is yes. Do you know when we come in to help you out? When you stop paying us back. That is when we take an active role. And so we're a debt lender. So if you keep, we go in, we provide you debt, we know you, we come visit you on a yearly basis. We sometimes stay with your family, make your kids cry because we beat you in checkers. Things like that. We have a very hands-on relationship, but you're the business person. We're on the debt side. We have a very different position. We're collateralized, things like that. They are in a different place altogether.
Yeah, we get very involved early on, take board seats, actively involved with monthly milestones, monthly financial reporting, that kind of stuff, for the first 12 to 18 months. And after that, hopefully other investors come along with a little bit longer term view and more cash than we have and get involved and take it from there. But first 12 to 18 months, we tend to be very heavy-handed, very involved.
I would second that. I'd say we're a bit less involved on a company-by-company basis and doing work at a more significant scale in terms of numbers of company, but less money and less involvement per company. But we're pretty involved shortly after we make the investment, and then it's either somebody bigger is taking it on, or it's probably not going to make it.
We don't get very actively involved. It's mostly monitoring and then decisions of further investment or kind of holding or wishing we hadn't made the investment.
So we invested in Ross, and what's key to Ross's model, or not in Ross, we invested in Village Capital. Totally different. What's interesting about Ross's model is when he invests, he has a local investor that goes alongside, which is really interesting when we're talking about operating in countries that, Ross's fund operates in, I don't even know how many countries now.
6.
Oh, I thought it was a lot more.
With people from 30 countries who've gone through programs, there's 6.
Oh, okay, same thing. 30 countries.
7 coming soon. Wouldn't you like to know which one?
You should come to an informational session about Village Capital.
So anyway, there's this idea of getting that local person also with local knowledge on the ground that's core to his model, which I think is also important because even with Miguel, he has funds operating in India, East Africa, and everything, and he can help out.
7 countries.
So you're in 7 countries too? Wow. So, getting people with local knowledge on the board who can also augment is really important.
Yeah, it's actually very hard in the impact space because most investors tend to be much more localized. So we can get stretched out a bit more.
I think knowing what you're good at and knowing what you're not good at is really important for an investor and the value you can bring beyond money. So I think we tend to be pretty heavily involved at the things that happen at a global scale, like helping entrepreneurs build boards, helping entrepreneurs raise money, things like the reason why we have local co-investors is things like I have no idea how to price my supply chain. It requires someone to sit in the office for 3 days and tally up everything. And our partner in Brazil is awesome at that, and that's why we co-invest with them. They have no network outside of Brazil, which is why they like to co-invest with us because we're global.
I have a question on fundraising. I was wondering, how do you identify investors that agree with your vision and principles? I assume that's slightly different from the traditional
Ross
investors.
buys me beer.
Are you talking about from an entrepreneur's perspective?
Yeah, just people who invest in you guys, provide funds.
Investors.
So investors and funds. As anybody, you're creating a fund, you write sort of a thesis that describes what you're going to invest in and why. And just like an entrepreneur, you go out and sell it, and you pitch it out to a lot of different people who have somehow signaled that they have an interest in that thesis. And then from there, you just kind of hope to get as many or the right ones that you sort of agree with. The one thing about taking investors, and whether it's an investment into your fund or whether it's a fund that's investing into your startup, it's a very long-term relationship. So you do have to make sure that your interests are aligned. You're not just taking cash. And that you generally want to work with them. I made that mistake a couple of times where there's people in our portfolio that I generally don't like, and it can be a really long, miserable relationship. So it's pretty critical that you pick carefully. But you're not beggars can't always be choosers, so it's a trade-off.
I mean, in terms of investors, it's the same thing as if I were raising a mainstream private equity fund. what is my strategy, does my strategy match up with what I'm promising on investment returns, things of that sort. Am I targeting accredited investors, unaccredited investors type of things, and how do I go out and reach that marketplace? And so I don't think there's really much different. I think the one big hurdle is that impact investors have their own theories of change. And so are you too general, are you too focused type of thing? Sometimes that can be a difficult situation. But in a lot of ways it just comes down to, like, what are you promising, and is there somebody out there who is, do you have a financial vehicle that's aligned with what you're promising, and does it work out? And if so, you can raise money potentially if there's people that agree with you. It's not, I guess in a lot of ways it's not that easy. It's not. And it's the same thing as being a social entrepreneur and trying to find somebody to invest you, or entrepreneur yourself trying to find somebody. I think everything has to kind of line up.
Really, really good fundraising though is an exchange. I think that the biggest mistake that fundraisers make is saying, who is rich and I can con or convince to, like, it's all about making the right ask. It's really about figuring out, Taryn and my investment relationship, Taryn does not have the bandwidth to go and have conversations with loan officers at banks in Louisville, Kentucky, but that's something that we do really well. And part of Taryn's incentive investing in us is actually, I want some exposure to the entrepreneurs that we've never heard of, and Ross's interns are running around doing that. And by investing in Ross, we get access to the best of it. So understanding what Taryn's incentives and specific needs are, it's an exchange. Taryn gives us or invests money in us to do the work that we can get back to her, but we also provide something her that she doesn't have anymore. So it's as important for you. It's as important for you to investigate what the incentives and wants of your investor is as it is for them to investigate whether they want to invest in you.
What I hear you saying though is for impact funds who are the likely investors, and I'd say right now they're kind of two suspects. One is foundations are probably are putting the most money into impact investing funds, and then the second is there's been some research done that kind of high net worth individuals kind of in the 30 to 45-year-old age bracket really want to do much more socially responsible work with their money. And the big firms, JP Morgan, Goldman, are all hearing that, and they're seeing it in their clients, and that their clients aren't necessarily behaving the way their parents did. And so they're trying to figure out how to deploy that money into this sector. But also, going back to our earlier comments about this is a pretty young and emergent space, that in my mind, I'm not sure there's really the capacity in the space to take huge amounts of money. So to me, it's kind of like they're just kind of a certain amount of ability, or you're going to start having more money chasing stuff than really, that's not where we are now, but I think that could happen.
In terms of demographics, we have about 1,400 investors. I would say 70% of that are women approximately, and approximately 60% of the money are held by women. And going to Paul's point, we work with a lot of wealth managers, and wealth managers are sweating because the next generation is coming in and saying, oh no, this is not how you're going to do it with my money. So they're just dying right now to better understand impact investing because the next gen just gets it. And they're like, we're not going to continue, business as usual cannot continue, and I can't continue to support that.
And if you take, and I'll make this up, but take an entrepreneur that has been very successful and now wants to invest in clean tech. If they're invested in kind of standard investment, they own huge, if they're indexed, they own huge positions in BP and Exxon and Monsanto and a bunch of things. And to just try to figure out, think then about a foundation, if you think of some of the progressive foundations off the West Coast, like Omidyar or Skoll, or Gates, they're putting 5% of their money to work every year as a foundation, but they got to invest the other 95%. What are you invested in if you're trying to invest in progressive social causes? How do you get returns on that? So I think that's another thing where those foundations are saying, how do we invest and keep our mission-related investing, our corpus, invested in ways that's consistent with our philanthropic or our foundation mission. And there are a lot of, just like there are wealth managers that are sweating, there are a lot of foundation CFOs that are sweating about, I don't want to go buy Exxon and then talk about how I'm helping the environment over here.
Well, in 2007, the LA Times had a front page article on the Gates Foundation basically saying with 5% of their money they're doing great things and 95% is working the exact opposite of that. And so that's kind of the big fear for a lot of executive directors there.
To wrap up, will you all talk for just a minute about what we undergraduates and graduate students can do to get involved in impact investing in the sector? What are our next steps?
It's a young field, and also being global in scale. I think that there's a lot of opportunities to do internships, to find organizations where you can get an internship earlier and get your hands dirty, go out and get into the field, learn about either in an emerging market or domestically, but learn about sort of an underserved area, so that you can have that experience, because that will help out a ton. And I'm always an advocate for understanding numbers and finance, even if you don't use them on a daily basis. If you're going to be involved in investing, having a background that you can leverage and understand that is absolutely critical. Village Capital is a great place to look for internships, or the Frontier Market Scouts out of Monterey Institute is actually a great place to look as well.
Yeah, I would just second what Miguel said. You can't get into this without understanding finance. I mean, that's core to everything we do. And there's a lot of interest, and it's difficult to get your foot in the door. So you can, do some internships, get a geographic understanding or a sector understanding that you can actually bring to an organization beyond just your financial skills. It's really key. And Frontier Market Scouts.
And Peace Corps. This is an amazing time to be where you're at and interested in this sector. And it is, if you're interested in starting a company, it's never been cheaper to start a company, or easier, I think, in the history of the world. So that's one angle. If you are an entrepreneur, there are a lot of people who think they should be entrepreneurs and start companies because of it. If you don't think you want to start a company, there are also a bunch of ways to get involved. I would say, understanding finance, how many of you are not in McIntyre? I would all take Com 180 or Intro to Accounting or basic Com 201 basic finance courses here, just so you know what you're seeing when you're seeing it. I would Google Frontier Market Scouts or go to our website, vilcap.com, and click on the link to apply for Frontier Market Scouts. It's basically training plus internship opportunities. It could be this summer with either startups or investment firms. Elliot Rosenberg, who organized this whole thing but is not here tonight, did it with one of our companies in Brazil last summer. Through the Parents program here, is Seed sponsoring internships?
Right, they are.
Seed is sponsoring internships with enterprises or with funds. I mean, the amazing thing about being at UVA is if you get on with one of these startups or with one of these firms, you can probably have UVA get you pizza money for the summer to cover your living expenses. I would get in with an enterprise. I think the other thing is, if you want to get in on the finance side, I think that people who have been at a consulting firm, an investment bank, and want to say, I've learned all these things and apply my skills to the startup finance side are a dime a dozen. People who have actually worked for an enterprise tend to be much better when they get in on the funding, or whether it's on the foundation side or the investing side, tend to be much better. So even if finance is the direction you want to go, I wouldn't rule out working for a startup for the summer or for after you graduate, just because it gives you a bit of credibility that a bunch of other people who are going after the same job won't have. So it's never been a better time to be interested in this kind of thing.
I think that's all really good advice. I guess the addition I'd have is this is kind of a hot field right now. So if you're like, oh, well, I work in impact investing, I should go work for Acumen Fund in New York. Line up. They get to choose 5 people out of thousands. But if you go to areas, for instance, that were hot a few years ago, like microfinance, and said, I'd like to go work for Axiom, where Miguel started out, I think, those are still great opportunities and, really good organizations to go and look at. Miguel mentioned Peace Corps. I think, probably a lot of you, the reason you're here is because you're very driven in goal setting. But I just say, always remember you could be wrong. I went to law school here 30 years ago and practiced law 3 years. When I was in law school, I really thought I was going to be a lawyer. It turned out other things caught my eye. And so remember that careers don't necessarily progress in like nice, clear, straight lines. And so if there are things that you're interested in, you're young and go explore them. You know, if you spent 2 years in Peace Corps, or 2 years working at a startup, and 2 years working at USAID or a foundation, you'd be really set up for this field, a career in this field. You'd also get to see, I mean, it's so hard to kind of know all the jobs that are out in the world until you get out and start working in them. And, you know, don't feel like you have to like sign up for life in some of these areas. But I think kind of going orthogonally to the Acumen funds or the Mini-Art networks or those or Google.org, you may have better luck.
Yeah, like we have a program this summer in Louisville, Kentucky, and it's for energy and agriculture innovations from the U.S. Midwest. There are going to be a bunch of really cool companies there, and if you went to Louisville and said, I want to do impact investing, there's a program there, and you'd probably be at or near the front of the line of interns for the program rather than one of 1,000. And so look at under-leveraged areas where you could jump to the front of the line, and that's how actually most all of us got here. So.
For Whiskey and Rye too.
All right, well, thank you very much for coming out today. This was incredible. And thank you for all of you for coming out tonight. That was really great. I hope you had a good time. Before you head out, I'm just going to make 2 plugs for other events that SEED is putting on.